There's something a lot of fun about smashing little ice puddles. It's kind of like the equivalent of popping bubble wrap. Hi, I'm Keith, and welcome back to the vlog. Well, that's a wrap on another week, so why don't we dive into things and break it down. So Monday had some really beautiful weather. Unfortunately, I had a prior engagement that kept me occupied from 7 a.m. till 9 p.m., and when I got home, frankly, I was too tired to take a walk. Tuesday saw another great day with the weather. However, I had a very important task I had to work on. If you've been following, then you know that I have been without a car since the end of November. You see, back in November when the car broke down, what had happened was I was driving down a mountain road and a deer jolted out into the road and I had to swerve to miss it. And when I did this caused the serpentine belt to come loose, wrap around what's called a belt tensioner, and rip this piece of equipment out of the frame, leaving 2 broken bolts. Without getting into too much detail, I will say a belt tensioner is a very important part of your car that helps the belt move to keep other components moving. Now, with these broken bolts that were in the frame, if I am unable to successfully extract those, the car is essentially a paperweight. So on Tuesday morning, it was time to finally try to fix it. Now, if you have been following the channel for a long time, then you know I've got skills when it comes to a vehicle. Back in the day, I owned a 1995 Nissan Maxima. She was my pride and joy. Back in 2015, I had hit a deer, and the insurance company totaled out the car. The cost of the repairs were double what the car was worth at the time. But to me, the car was priceless. So I took the invoice I got from the body shop and I went online and I ordered all the parts it said I needed. Then I went onto YouTube and I watched a whole lot of how-to videos. And slowly but surely, I put my car back together. Now, I did get some help from an old friend of mine. There were some things I couldn't do, mainly some welding things, but ultimately I put my baby back together myself. In 2018, when I was prepping for my epic cross-country road trip, I had to do some maintenance before the big drive, and even after all that maintenance I did, the starter still died, and I ended up having to change it out in my brother's driveway outside of Toledo, Ohio. But alas, the car drove great. Sadly, that fall, the transmission died, and while there were plans to get it fixed, unfortunately, I had to let that car go, and it's plagued me to this very day. Anyway, back to the Ultima. The Ultima has been my new chariot since 2018, and this car has taken me all over the country. And it's a great car, it's great with gas, and I have put a lot of work into it. Now, with these broken bolts, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. You see, when the car broke down, it overheated, and I did not know the extent of the damage to that. I didn't know if I blew a head gasket, but there would be no way to determine that without getting those busted bolts out of there and getting a belt tensioner back on. So I set up for my task at hand. And shortly into it, I realized I was out of my depth. I felt that there was no way I was going to get these bolts out without screwing it up. And something this important, I had to call in some big guns. So I got a hold of an old friend of mine who put me in touch with a couple of mechanics. They came to the house and I gave them the breakdown. They quoted me a price that on the surface might seem kind of expensive, but considering how important the job was, it was worth it. I would rather spend this money to get the car fixed than to have to buy a new car or potentially rent a car. So we agreed on a strategy, and they said they would be there the next day to pick up the car. Well, later that Tuesday, I went for another glorious walk. Now, if you watched to the end of last week's video, then you know I have achieved the 3-mile walk.
Halfway through the big lap.
It was such a joy to say halfway through the big lap, because frankly, I've been missing that all year. So then the following day, I waited for the gentleman to come pick up the vehicle. Unfortunately, they got tied up with other business, and by the time I knew that, it was pouring rain, and I really didn't feel like going for a walk in that. The following day after that, they came and got the vehicle about 11:30 in the morning, and I was told that they would probably get to it the following day, which was fine because I had just gone months without my car, so what's a few more days? So a couple hours later, I was suiting up for a walk, and I get a phone call from one of the mechanics. And I think, oh no, this can't be good. But it turns out it was good. He informed me that not only did he get the bolts out, that he did other work. Because he got the bolts out so quickly, and we negotiated a worst case scenario price, he went ahead and did some of the other work, which I thought was great because at this point, my window with the weather for the other stuff was kind of past me and it would be a while before I'd get to it. Not only that, but he was able to figure out what caused the belt to slip in the first place. It turns out the alternator, which this caught me off guard because I replaced the alternator in 2022, and of all the components that I thought would have failed on me, the alternator wasn't even a possibility. So this came as a shock. So what happened was the bearings were going bad inside the pulley, and as a result, the pulley was slightly off, ever so slightly. And when the deer darted out in the road and I jerked the wheel to miss the deer, that was just enough for the belt to slip and get wrapped up and rip the belt tensioner out. The biggest takeaway, though, was I didn't blow the head gasket. So I will take an alternator over a head gasket any day of the week. And these gentlemen got my baby up and running, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. As far as March goes, I think up to this stage, if I were to break March down, I would probably call it half measure March or mediocre March. While I'm doing considerably better than January and February, I haven't really reached the full potential. I haven't walked every day. Even though the days I'm walking, I am doing 3 miles. And the diet was definitely a lot better this week. It's just not quite to peak Keith yet when it comes to the diet. So I'm hoping to go into next week better with the diet. But this weather continues to be crazy. Last week we had the false spring. I'm outside in shorts and a t-shirt, loving life. This walk, I'm all bundled up, freezing my ass off. And that's the thing about adapting to the weather. You know, when it's really, really cold and then it gets a little warmer, you feel the difference. You're like, oh, this is great. But then when you get spoiled for those few days when it's in the high 60s and 70s, when the temp drops, you feel it even harder. You know, and this upcoming week, I've seen that the weather is going to be rainy and then the temperature is going to drop down to like 20 degrees with a -1 wind chill. So I'm concerned about that. The knee has been holding up really well, but there's always that constant fear that it's going to go out. The back hasn't given me any trouble this week, so I think I've already worked through the back issues. Well, I think that's going to wrap things up for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, take care, and I'll see you later.